Welcome to the Everything History Podcast for episode 63, Potidaea and the Debate at Sparta, 432 BCE. Today we'll be coming right up to the brink of war across all Hellas, that is Greece, as Athens aggressively moves in northern Greece against Potidaea, the locals, and the Macedonians. When news of those happenings reached the mainland, the deep mainland that is, the Spartans assemble and debate whether or not the Athenians broke the truce.
I discharged my last duty as king and emperor.
This is Everything History.
Everything you hold worthwhile is at stake.
We meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time.
I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth.
The previous episode concluded just after the Corcyraeans and the Corinthians had returned to their respective home harbors, after a very large naval battle in the Ambracian Gulf off the coast of Epirus. The only thing conclusive to come from that battle was that Athens was officially a combative enemy of Corinth. And given that Corinth had been fighting along many of their Peloponnesian allies, it was fair to say that Athens was an active enemy of most of the Peloponnese. Given that the head honcho of the Peloponnese was Sparta, those aggrieved Peloponnesian states led by Corinth were sure to complain and plead their case to yours truly, Sparta, in order to once again make Sparta an active enemy of Athens. Such a scenario will soon come to pass at the tail end of this episode, but first, another incident, a dispute or crisis if you like, occurred between Athens and the Peloponnesians. This was the dispute over Potidaea, and this one was initiated by the Athenians. Potidaea was a city in northern Greece, and as of 432 BCE, Potidaea was in fact a tribute-paying city-state within the Athenian Empire. The city was located on an isthmus leading to the Pallene Peninsula. The location of this city can be seen on the YouTube video for this episode, and Potidaea was very near in proximity to Macedonia, a Hellenic kingdom in the northernmost reaches of Greece. Macedonia would of course eventually produce Alexander the Great, in fact less than a century after the events concerning Potidaea. But now in 432 BCE, Potidaea became a hot-button issue because they were in fact a colony of Corinth, and given the fact that Corinth and Athens was now at war, Athens was concerned about a revolt from Potidaea, and a spread of that revolt across their subjugated cities in northern Greece and Thracian territories. This very much included Macedonia because Macedonia was on friendly terms with Potidaea and the other local peoples and city-states, but also, and chiefly, because the current king of Macedonia, King Perdiccas, was hostile to the Athenians because the Athenians had tried to depose and kill him in favor of his brother Philip not long ago. And Perdiccas was now very wary of the Athenians and on the lookout for their political and foreign machinations. This all being the case, in early 432 BCE, the Athenians ordered the Potidaeans to strip down their fortifications facing the Pallene Peninsula and to banish their Corinthian magistrates, both current and future magistrates. To keep an eye on the Macedonians and the rest of the local states, the Athenians sent 30 ships and 1,000 hoplites to Potidaea. The Potidaeans felt aggrieved at their situation and sent envoys to Athens to ask them to cease their operations and also envoys to Sparta, just in case. The negotiations in Athens proved useless, as usual, but the Spartans agreed to invade Attica if the Athenians attacked Potidaea directly. With this news, Thucydides tells us that the Potidaeans and their Thracian neighbors rebelled against Athens. King Perdiccas of the Macedonians rallied them and gathered the nearby coastal peoples in rebellion at Olynthus, a city near Potidaea. Upon hearing this news, the arriving Athenian fleet temporarily ignored Potidaea and the revolt and attacked Macedonia directly, reigniting the civil war there with the assistance of Philip, the renegade brother of King Perdiccas. The Corinthians, fearing the worst for their colony, sent an army of 2,000 troops of mixed quality to defend Potidaea. The Athenians thereafter doubled their efforts by sending 2,000 hoplites and 40 ships under Strategos Callias, strategos meaning general. This force arrived unobstructed and joined the other Athenians in their siege warfare at Pydna against King Perdiccas. The siege of Pydna in Macedonia, however, ended quite shortly when King Perdiccas agreed to cease hostilities and actually ally himself with the Athenians. The allied force then maneuvered its great bulk along the coast towards Potidaea. The Corinthians arrived first and set up defenses near Olynthus, using the isthmus to their advantage. The chosen strategos for the Corinthian and their allies was Aristeus, and the soldiers chose King Perdiccas, oddly enough, to command their cavalry. And straightway upon receiving word, King Perdiccas broke his agreement with the Athenians and joined the Corinthians, Potidaeans, and other allies once more. Still, the Athenians vastly outnumbered this allied coalition in northern Greece, and the two armies engaged near the isthmus, with Aristeus commanding the Corinthian wing of the line, while the Corinthian allies fought on the other side of the battle line without Aristeus' direct command. The Corinthian wing routed the Athenians on their flank, but their allies on the opposite flank collapsed and retreated into Potidaea, much like the naval battle the previous year. Aristeus led his Corinthian hoplites back, breaking through the Athenian rear with great danger as he came back to Potidaea and the defenses there. The victory went to the Athenians. In the battle, the Potidaeans and company lost some 300 men, and the Athenians lost only 150, but the Corinthians managed to kill Callias, the Athenian strategos. The fighting then de-escalated into a stalemate, but the Athenians had the upper hand, and they increased their advantage when they sent another army, this time of 1,600 hoplites, to assist. When these arrived, the Athenians pressed forward, and slowly they began to cut the Potidaeans and company off. The Athenians set up a naval blockade and blockaded the isthmus as well. Aristeus encouraged the Potidaeans to try and pierce the blockade and flee for safety, leaving only a small garrison behind in order to lengthen the siege and hope for inbound forces. But the Potidaeans refused to leave. But Aristeus and a band of Corinthians did escape, however, and they continued guerrilla activities while keeping contact with the leaders at home in Corinth. The siege continued, and the Athenians laid waste to all the surrounding country, but still the siege of Potidaea continued. Now, meanwhile back at the ranch, in this case, meanwhile back at Corinth and Sparta, if you recall, the Spartans had agreed to invade Attica if the Potidaeans were assaulted by the Athenians. Well, the Corinthians and Potidaeans certainly remembered. The Corinthians sent delegates rapidly to Sparta and encouraged, loudly, that their allies should do the same. Aegina also sent delegates, although Thucydides tells us that they did this in secret because they feared an Athenian response. Sparta openly invited all claimants, but promised nothing other than deliberation. Many came forward at Sparta, including the Megarians, and all the city-state delegates told of the grievances they suffered at the hands of the Athenians. Thucydides reports that the Corinthians went last, for they had the largest laundry list of complaints, as you could have guessed, and they beseeched the Spartans to declare war on Athens. I'll abbreviate their remarks. Quote, Spartan, what makes you reluctant to listen to us others is the great trust and confidence which you have in your own constitution and in your own way of life. This is a quality which certainly makes you moderate in your judgment. It is also perhaps responsible for a kind of ignorance which you show when you are dealing with foreign affairs. Many times before now, we have told you what we were likely to suffer from Athens, and on each occasion, instead of taking to heart what we were telling you, you chose instead to suspect our motives, and to consider that we were speaking only about our own grievances. The result has been that you did not call this meeting of our allies before the damage was done. You waited until now, when we are actually suffering from it. We have to complain of Athens for her insolent aggression, and Sparta for her neglect of our advice. Long speeches are unnecessary. You can see yourselves how Athens has deprived some states of their freedom and is scheming to do the same for others, especially among our own allies, and that she herself has for a long time been preparing for the eventuality of war. Why otherwise should she have forcibly taken over from us the control of Corcyra? Why is she besieging Potidaea? And it is you who are responsible for all this, you Spartans. It is you who in the first place allowed Athens to fortify their city and build the long walls after the Persian War. Since then, and up to the present day, you have withheld freedom, not only from those who have been enslaved by Athens, but even from your own allies. Why are we still considering whether aggression has taken place instead of how we can resist it? Men who are capable of real action first make their plans and then go ahead forward, without hesitation, while their enemies have still not made up their minds. As for the Athenians, we know their methods, and how they gradually encroach upon their neighbors. Now they are proceeding slowly because they think that your insensitiveness to the situation enables them to go on their way unnoticed. You will find that they will develop their full strength once they realize that you do not see what is happening and are still doing nothing to prevent it. You Spartans are the only people in Hellas who wait calmly on events, relying for your own defense not on action, but on making people think that you will act. You alone do nothing in the early stages to prevent an enemy's expansion. You wait until your enemy has doubled his strength. Certainly, you used to have a reputation of being safe and sure enough. Now one wonders whether this reputation was deserved. Now we should not like that any of you to think that we are speaking in an unfriendly spirit. We are only remonstrating with you, as is natural when one's friends are making mistakes. Real accusations must be kept for one's enemies who have actually done one harm. Then also we have as much right as anyone else to point out faults in our neighbors, especially when we consider the enormous difference between you and the Athenians. To our minds, you are quite unaware of this difference. You have never yet tried to imagine what sort of people these Athenians are against whom you will have to fight. How much indeed, how completely different from you. An Athenian is always an innovator, quick to form a resolution, and quick at carrying it out. You, on the other hand, are good at keeping things as they are. You never originate an idea, and your action tends to stop short of its aim. Then again, the Athenian daring will outrun its own resources. They will take risks against their better judgment, and still in the midst of danger remain confident. But your nature is always to do less than you could have done, to mistrust your own judgment, however sound it may be, and to assume that dangers will last forever. When a city can live in peace and quiet, no doubt the old established ways are best. But when one is constantly being faced by new problems, one has to be capable of approaching them in an original way. Thus Athens, because of the very variety of her experience, is a far more modern state than you are. Your inactivity has done harm enough. Now let there be an end of it. Give your allies, especially Potidaea, the help you promised, and invade Attica at once. Do not let your friends and your kinsmen fall into the hands of bitter enemies. Do not force the rest of us in despair to join a different alliance. If we did so, no one could rightly blame us, neither the gods who witnessed our oaths, nor any man capable of appreciating our situation. The people who break a treaty of alliance are the ones who fail to give the help they swore to give, not those who have to look elsewhere because they have been left in the lurch. But if you will only make up your minds to act, we will stand by you. It would be an unnatural thing for us to make a change, nor could we find other allies with whom we have such close bonds. You have heard what we have to say. Think carefully over your decision. From your fathers was handed down to you the leadership of the Peloponnese. Maintain its greatness." End quote. Now that was a very crafty speech by the Corinthians. It began aggressive, relaxed to softness, and ended firm. There's a reason people study such arts, historically and for rhetorical or oratorical reasons. By the way, the Corinthian speech at Sparta extends from Book 1, chapters 68 to 71. After the Corinthian delegation stepped down, an Athenian representative stepped forward to make a statement, and the Spartans invited him to do so. The Athenians said, quote, "This delegation of ours did not come here to enter into a controversy with your allies, but to deal with the business on which our city sent us. We observe, however, that extraordinary attacks have been made upon us, and so we have come forward to speak. We shall make no reply to the charges which these cities have made against us. Your assembly is not a court of law, competent to listen to pleas either from them or from us. Our aim is to prevent you from coming to the wrong decision on a matter of great importance through paying too much attention to the views of your allies. At the same time, we should like to examine the general principles of the argument used against us. There is no need to talk about what happened long ago. There our evidence would be that of hearsay, rather than that of eyewitnesses amongst our audience. But we must refer to the Persian War, to events well known to you all, even though you may be tired of constantly hearing the story. In our actions at that time, we ventured everything for the common good. You have your share in what was gained. Do not deprive us of all our share of glory, and of the good that it may do to us. We shall not be speaking in the spirit of one who is asking a favor, but of one who is producing evidence. Our aim is to show you what sort of city you will have to fight against, if you make the wrong decision. This is our record. At Marathon, we stood out against the Persians and faced them single-handed. In the later invasion, when we were unable to meet the enemy on land, we and all our people took to our ships and joined in the battle at Salamis. It was this battle that prevented the Persians from sailing against the Peloponnese and destroying the cities one by one. The courage, the daring that we showed were without peril. With no help coming to us by land, with all the states up to our frontier already enslaved, we chose to abandon our city and to sacrifice our property. Then, so far from deserting the rest of our allies in the common cause, or making ourselves useless to them by dispersing our forces, we took to our ships and chose the path of danger, and with no grudges against you for not having come to our help earlier. So it is that we can claim to have given more than we received. Surely, Spartans, the courage, the resolution, and the ability which we showed then ought not to be repaid by such immoderate hostility from the Hellenes, especially so far as our empire is concerned. We did not gain this empire by force. It came to us at a time when you were unwilling to fight on to the end against the Persians. At this time our allies came to us of their own accord, and begged us to lead them. Finally, there came a time when we were surrounded by enemies, and we had already crushed some revolts, when you had lost the friendly feeling that you used to have for us, and turned against us, and begun to arouse our suspicion. At this point, it was clearly no longer safe to allow our empire to slip from our grasp, especially as any allies that left us would go over to you. And when tremendous dangers are involved, no one can be blamed for looking out for his own interest. Certainly you Spartans, and your leadership of the Peloponnese, have arranged the affairs of the various states so as to suit yourselves. So it is with us. We have done nothing extraordinary, nothing contrary to human nature, in accepting an empire when it was offered to us, and then in refusing to give it up. 3 very powerful motives prevent us from doing so: security, honor, and self-interest. And we were not the first to act in this way. Far from it. It has always been a rule that the weak should be subjugated to the strong, and besides, we consider that we are worthy of our power. Up till the present moment you, too, used to think that we were. And on one point we are quite certain. If you were to destroy us and to take over our empire, you would soon lose all of the goodwill which you have gained because of others being afraid of us. That is, if you are going to stick to those principles of behavior which you showed before, in the short time when you led Hellas against the Persians, your own regulated ways of life do not mix well with the ways of others. Also, it is a fact that when one of you goes abroad, he follows neither his own rules nor those of the rest of Hellas. Take time, then, over your decision, which is an important one. Do not allow considerations of other people's opinions and other people's complaints to involve you in difficulties which you will feel yourselves. Think, too, of the great part that is played by the unpredictable in war. Think of it now, before you are actually committed to war. The longer a war lasts, the more likely things are to depend upon accidents. Neither you nor we can see into them. We have to abide their outcome in the dark. And when people are entering upon a war, they do things the wrong way round. Action comes first, and it is only when we have already suffered that they begin to think. We, however, are still far removed from such a mistaken attitude. So, to the best of our belief, are you. And so we urge you now, while we are both still free to make sensible decisions, do not break the peace. Do not go back upon your oaths. Instead, let us settle our differences by arbitration, as is laid down in the treaty. If you will not do so, we shall have as our witnesses the gods who heard our oaths. You, Spartans, will have begun the war, and we shall attempt to meet you in any and every field of action that you may choose. End quote. This Athenian speech extended from chapters 73 to 78 of Thucydides' first book, and after the Athenians delivered their rather threatening speech, the Spartans had a decision to make amongst themselves, so they dismissed the outside representatives, and Spartan king Archidamus, who will be instrumental in the first stage of the war, so much so that it is actually named after him, i.e. the Archidamian War. So King Archidamus rose and gave a speech. Now Thucydides evidently had a source for this, presumably a Spartan present, which is quite possible because Thucydides actually went to Sparta at some point in the war. But King Archidamus gives a rather long speech in Thucydides' text. I seriously doubt that he gave such a long oration, because the Spartans were not one to speak long. Nevertheless, I will abbreviate it just like the others. King Archidamus said, quote, Spartans, in the course of my life, I have taken part in many wars, and I see among you people of the same age as I am. They and I have had experience, and so are not likely to share in what may be the general enthusiasm for war, nor to think that war is a good thing or a safe thing. And you will find, if you look carefully into the matter, that this present war which you are now discussing is not likely to be anything on a small scale. We shall be engaged in war with people who live far off, people who have the widest experience of the sea and who are extremely well equipped in all other directions, very wealthy both as individuals and as a state, with ships and cavalry and hoplites, with a population bigger than that of any other place in Hellas, and then too with a number of allies who pay tribute to them. How then can we irresponsibly start a war with such a people? Perhaps there is ground for confidence in the superiority which we have in heavy infantry and in actual numbers, assets which will enable us to invade and devastate their land. Athens, however, controls plenty of land outside Attica and can import what she wants by sea. We must not bolster ourselves up with the false hope that if we devastate their land, the war will soon be over. I fear that it is more likely that we shall be leaving it to our children after us. So convinced am I that the Athenians have too much pride to become slaves of their own land, or to shrink back from warfare as though they were inexperienced in it. Not that I am suggesting that we should calmly allow them to injure our allies, and should turn a blind eye to their machinations. What I do suggest is that we should not take up arms at the present moment. Instead, we should send envoys to them, and put our grievances before them. We should not threaten war too openly, though at the same time we should make it clear that we are not going to let them have their own way. In the meantime, we should be making our own preparations by winning over new allies, both among the Hellenes and among foreigners, from any quarter, in fact, where we can increase our naval and financial resources. At the same time, we must put our own affairs in order. If they pay attention to our diplomatic protests, so much the better. If they do not, then after 2 or 3 years have passed, we shall be in a much sounder position and can attack them if we decide to do so. As for complaints, whether they come from cities or from private citizens, they are capable of arrangement. But when war is declared by our whole confederacy for the sake of the interest of some of us, and when it is impossible to foresee the courses which that war will take, then an honorable settlement is not an easy thing at all. Let no one call it cowardice if we, in all our numbers, hesitate before attacking a single city. They have just as many allies as we have, and their allies pay tribute. As for being slow and cautious, which is the usual criticism made against us Spartans, there is nothing to be ashamed of in that. If you take something on before you are ready for it, hurry at the beginning will mean delay at the end. Besides, the city in which we live has always been free and always famous. Slow and cautious can equally be called wise and sensible. Certainly, it is because we possess these qualities that we are the only people who do not become arrogant when we are successful, and who in times of stress are less likely to give in than others. Let us never give up this discipline which our fathers have handed down to us, and which we still preserve, and which has always done us good. Let us not be hurried, and in one short day's space come to a decision which will so profoundly affect the lives of men and their fortunes, the fates of cities and their national honor. As for the Athenians, I advise sending a mission to them, about Potidaea and also about the other cases where our allies claim to have been ill-treated. Especially is this the right thing to do, since the Athenians themselves are prepared to submit to an arbitration. And when one party offers this, it is quite illegal to attack them first, as though he was definitely in the wrong. And at the same time, we shall carry on our preparations for war. This decision is the best one you can make for yourselves, and it is also the one most likely to inspire fear in your enemies, my Spartans." End quote. After King Archidamus, Sthenelaiades, an emperor of the Spartans for the year 432, delivered a final, short speech. Quote, "I do not understand these long speeches which the Athenians make. Though they said a great deal in praise of themselves, they made no attempt to contradict the fact that they are acting aggressively against our allies and against the Peloponnese. And surely, if it is the fact that they have a good record in the past against the Persians, and now have a bad record as regards us, then they deserve to pay double for it, since, though they were once good, they have now turned out bad. We are the same then and now, and if we are sensible, we shall not allow any aggression against our allies, and shall not wait before we come to their help. Others may have a lot of money and ships and horses, but we have good allies, and we ought not to betray them to the Athenians. And this is not a matter to be settled by lawsuits and by words. It is not because of words that our own interests are suffering. Instead, we should come to the help of our allies quickly and with all our might, and let no one tell us that when we are being attacked we should sit down and discuss matters. These long discussions are rather for those who are meditating aggression themselves. Therefore, Spartans, cast your votes for the honor of Sparta and for war. Do not allow the Athenians to grow still stronger. Do not entirely betray your allies. Instead, let us, with the help of heaven, go forward to meet the aggressor." End quote. Sthenelaidas then put the matter to the vote, saying, quote, "Spartans, those of you who think the treaty has been broken and that the Athenians are aggressors, get up and stand on one side. Those who do not think so, stand on the other side." The vast majority agreed that Athens had broken the truce, but this was not a declaration of war, not quite yet. For that, the Spartans needed to assemble all their Peloponnesian allies. That and more will be covered on the next episode of the Everything History podcast.
Remember that you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and YouTube, if you so choose, that is, and you can also contact me on the podcast's Facebook page or the email address everythinghistorypodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you very much.